Welcome to the 22nd day of Advent of Cyber 2023. We are on red flagged lab SSRF, stands for server side request forgery. The jingle your SSRF bells, Mary command and control adventure. I will start the machine right away and start reading through the recover the objectives and the theme of this one. As the elves try to recover the compromised servers, Maxkidi's SOC team identify abnormal activity and notice that a massive amount of data is being sent to a known server, already identified on the day 9. An insider has likely created a malicious backdoor. Maxkidi has contacted Detective Frost O from law enforcement to help them. Can you assist Detective Frost O in taking down the command and control server? So it's the C2 secret thing that we found on day 9, understanding server-side request forgery, which different types of SSRF are used to exploit the vulnerability, prerequisites for exploiting the vulnerability, how the attack works, how to exploit the vulnerability, and the measures that we can take to mitigate and protect. Okay, so we have different types of SSRF attack. The basic one, which is basically sorry for the redundant wording. The attacker sends crafted requests from the vulnerable server to internal or external resources, and they might attempt to access files on the local file system, and those are basically provided back as a response, meaning that we can read what is the response, what are the metadata that are displayed or whatever. So that's the normal, straightforward kind of SSRF. Blind SSRF is, as it says, we don't see the results, the response of the request. Instead, we are using other information to verify if something of the request has been working or not, depending on, for example, the time it took in order to get back. We might infer that the request went through, and therefore, if we were scanning IPs, for example, that IP is open and vice versa. Semi-blind SRF is where we don't see the direct responses in the browser or the application, but we can have indirect clues like side channels information or observable effects that allows to determine if there is a success or a failure. And so that's definitely a gray area between the blind SSRF and the other one. Prerequisites for exploitation, you need to be able to input something, so vulnerable input point. Web application must have input fields susceptible to manipulation, such as URL, file upload functionalities, and so on. And also, the input needs to not be validated, or at least validated incorrectly, so that we can bypass it and being able to provide the correct request crafting in order to get through it and bypass the validation if there is one. It's pretty straightforward as how it works. We identify vulnerable input from the server, and from there we inject a malicious URL or a payload that will make the application request the unintended way. And this input could be pointing to URL from inside the network or the loopback address, so it's like the local host, or even like going outside of the server for DOS attack or stuff like that. So the idea is then being able to request things that we shouldn't have access to. The application server is unaware that the input is malicious and then makes the request to the resource, and that request is then able to provide sensitive information or external systems data. One of the main example that is used for those, and if something is hosted on the cloud or Amazon Web Services, it's the metadata URL that allows to provide credentials and being able to see the secrets and stuff like that. So obviously exploiting the responses, if you are able to point it to something that is worse or sensitive, you can then pivot from there, being able to see the SSH config or the metadata for AWS allow you to pivot and go further and exploit further and escalate your entry point into something more impactful. So how are we going to use SRF to hack on the C2 server that we had? Interesting part here is that in Bug Bounty, the hacking of a C2 server is unacceptable and illegal. You have to keep that in mind. Here, the TryHackMe lab is explicitly mentioning the fact that if you end up finding or looking at something that looks like a C2 server within your adventures, don't try to hack it. This knowledge here is provided only for educational purposes, and you have to provide all the information back to the incident response team of the program and don't do anything on your side. So apparently the detective tried everything else and it just stays with the SSRF now. So I started the machine already and I will add that URL into my etc hosts. So the IP is this one and the DNS is this one. Okay, so now we need to find a way, we need to find an input. So either we could maybe have like, so first when I see that I want to do admin because that's always okay. Oh, we have a documentation. Aha. How many requests per 1 minute? There is no limit. Awesome. Currently, we have not enabled any whitelisting, and you can use protocol like HTTP file. Interesting. FTP. What is the file name that contains all the config.php? Is a file that contains default credentials for the dashboard. Okay, so armed with all of that, we could craft. Okay, so we do this, and it has been mentioned that file is available. And so if I do etc/password, I do see the etc password file. So as you can see, that didn't work. We had a hint here with the important file config.php, so that should be providing us the information. The fact that etc password worked means that it's a Linux box. So do we have interesting. So network reload API headers. Boop, 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 boop. Okay, we have Apache. It's a server Apache, which means we can try var www dash html and API.php. Okay, so we have an Apache word. So the idea here is we can config here our login and here our password. Okay, so MacGreedy as login, and as a password we have MacGreedy something. And here we go. We have the box. We have access to the box and we can see that there are 5 networks. Yes, we know 65 files. Okay, so looks like we're there. Is SSRF the process in which the attacker tricks the server into loading only external resources? It's an A because we can provide internal one. What is the C2 version? What is the C2 version? C2 version, C2 version, C2 version. The C2 version, interesting. Maybe it was the okay, the version copyright. Oh, version 1.1 here. It was way off my vision area. What is the username for accessing the C2 panel? It's MacGreedy. What is the flag value after accessing the C2 panel? We had it at the top. THM exploited. And what is the flag value after stopping the data exfiltration from MacGreedy's computer? So as you could look at the mitigation things, so you can employ more validation and sanitization. Obviously, that URL thing is what has allowed us to hack into the C2 server. The other points would be to just make sure that we are providing correct ACL, so access control listing to the domain and IP of the application, and only those that are authorized are able to access it. Apply network segmentation to restrict requests to authorized resources. That's the way to layer up the network so that only a specific VLAN or area of network like a DMZ or something would be able to access only those that are within the same um, uh, network. And if you need to have access to something else, you would need to request or provide the correct authentication scheme or mechanism. Following the principle of least privilege, granting the minimum permission required for system operation. That's the same thing here. Okay, this room was pretty straightforward, although it was a red. It was pretty fast and quick to interact, given that the box was straightforward and pretty vulnerable directly to the normal SSRF. Um, Thank you for your time. See you next day. Bye bye.